What's up, everybody? We're back here on the factory tour. I'm joined today by Malcolm, another analyst from DFF, making his first ever appearance on the show. We actually tried to do this a little while ago, but Malcolm was overseas studying in Austria, and the Wi-Fi was not cooperating. So we had to put that on the shelf. And he's back stateside, and he's here today to talk all things startup strategy. We're going to talk a little DeAndre Hopkins. First things first, Malcolm, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling very good because I have good Wi-Fi. I'm super thankful to Chris Miles. He came in, totally saved me when my Wi-Fi was just horrible. But I'm super excited to be on the show finally.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I know it's going to be a good one, and we have some great stuff to talk about. You sound great as well, so
Thank you.
we're ready to get into it. You have done. I was looking back at your catalog of articles on Dynasty Football Factory, and you have really just hammered startup strategy this offseason. Like over the last several months, you've written about what to do at every draft slot. You wrote about dynasty versus redraft ADPs. And then you wrote the whole strategy guide for DFF's startup guide. It has like 140 player breakdowns, and then you wrote the like manifesto of startup strategy. And we're gonna really hammer that today. Go through like all the different positional strategy that you talked about, and then connect that to existing leagues as well. But I just wanted to kind of get a general feel for that piece. You talk a lot about your specific process and how it's important to have a process. So, what is your process generally, and how did that come to be your process?
Yeah, I would say that I'm gonna talk way more about this later. But my real process is just when I hop into a startup, the first thing I'm looking for is just an elite quarterback. And if I can get two, that's great. And from there, I don't wing it, but if I can get those two pieces, then I know I'm set for at least a couple of years. Like it's really, really hard to get two elite quarterbacks and then like fail your startup. So for me, I would say my real process is not just selecting good players, but it's like building a winning roster.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. We actually talked about that last week on the mailbag show. That same thing. There's a question about startup strategies, and I said my go-to is like lock down the elite quarterbacks as early as possible. So I'm with you there. That reminds me, I should thank everybody out there listening for an awesome mailbag show. Those of you that sent in the questions, they were really awesome. They were fun to answer. If you didn't get a chance to listen to that episode, I had Billy on again, and we just ran through a whole bunch of questions. We talked about fighting giant ducks and trading for Dak Prescott, and it was just a really good show. So you should check it out if you can, and send me more questions. Like DM me on Twitter, at me on Twitter. Send me questions because I want to do more mailbag segments or full episodes in the future. I need more questions to do that, so help me out. Or you can leave them in the YouTube comments as well. So I think that's all the bookkeeping and all the setting the show up. So let's just jump into here to some news. Finally, we have some news. It's been like a total wasteland over the past couple of months, just trying to spin dynasty content out of basically nothing, which is why we've done so much theory and everything, which is like obviously super important. And I like talking about it, but it's cool to have some actual news. DeAndre Hopkins finally signed a contract. Unfortunately, in my opinion, he signed with probably the worst team of all of the realistic options, and that's the Tennessee Titans. So, Malcolm, I'll let you start us off here. What are your immediate thoughts about this signing for Hopkins?
Yeah, so it's really funny because the episode we were supposed to do was, I believe, episode 5 in the middle of May.
Mhm.
And you told me what we were going to be talking about, and D Hop had just gotten cut. And now it's 2 months
Right.
later, and I'm just repurposing the notes because D Hop finally got signed somewhere for like a $25 million contract over 2 years. I think that's okay money. I think that's definitely good money. He's getting his bag before he retires. I'm all for it. And before and after he gotten cut, I liked him at price. You could get him at like the 809 before he got cut, and then right after he got cut, he like shot right up. You can get him at like the 801, which I thought was it's bound to happen once he got cut from the Cardinals offense and all that. So last season he was putting up 17 points a game when he came back from the suspension. He came back week 7, played through week 16. So he played a total of 9 games, and he only played 4 of those with Kyler. So we saw D-Hop do what he's done like his entire career, which is excel with just trash cans thrown on the ball. Like he had Trace McSorley tossed him the ball. It was just a real mess. But he still put up a 29.4% target share, which was fourth in the league. And I'd say over that many games, that's not a small sample size. Like I said, it was 9 games. 2.21 yards per out run, which is good for 17th. Like he was definitely still elite last year. So his talent, I don't think is the problem. I think that the big problem is he's on the Titans, and I think it's a really kind of lazy take to just say he's Julio 2.0. I think Julio, when he joined the Titans, was washed. I think that Diop is still talented. I think that Ryan Tannehill is probably a much better quarterback than a lot of people seem to think. I think it's much more likely that last season Tannehill, A, he was injured, and B, he was probably having a down year when he was playing without one of the best wide receivers in the game in A.J. Brown. Like his receiving core, his wide receivers and his tight ends were horrible. And also the biggest problem with the Titans, I would say, is that they were 30th in pass attempts with 26.8 per game, compared to the Cardinals with 39.1. The Cardinals were fourth. So that's, I would say, the biggest problem. It's nothing related to the talent. I would really say, if anyone, it's just purely the game scripts we might see and just the overall passing volume. But I've seen some guys who do projections like RotoSurgeon or Kev on Twitter. He's projecting D-Hop for like 14 points a game, which I think in my eyes seems about right. So it seems like D-Hop, as long as he doesn't shoot way up in price, which I really doubt considering he's on the Titans, I'm still buying tentatively in the kind of Keenan Allen kind of buy, where he's going to go into your flex spot, give you pretty steady production. He might have some boom weeks. He might have some bust weeks, but at least for the next year, I'm not scared of Diop at the price, which is mid 9th round.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it really, thoroughly there. He was still good last year. I think he's maybe stylistically changed a little bit from his heyday, but he's still able to kind of dominate targets, and he's going to continue to do that in Tennessee. I don't think Treylon Burks and Chigakonkwo are going to really prevent Hopkins from commanding an elite target share. It's going to come down to the volume, which is why I don't like the spot. I don't really think that the passing volume is going to come up tremendously. I mean, you had a couple of Malik Willis starts last year suppressing that passing total. Tannehill had the injury, and obviously bringing in superior talent is going to have some impact on the way that they run the offense. So all that being said, I don't think they'll be 30th in pass attempts, but it's still going to be one of the more run heavy teams in the league. Mike Vrabel just seems to have that tendency. Even when Derrick Henry's missed games, they still really like to run the rock. So yeah, it's just hard to get excited. Like you said, 14 points per game is a reasonable projection. Okay, I mean, that's all fine and good. But when you're investing in a 30, 31-year-old wide receiver, kind of the allure of that is that you're hoping you can access this high ceiling at a suppressed price. When the Browns or the Chiefs or the Jets or whoever were on the table as possible destinations, you could still see that 17, 18 point per game possibility, which is what he was doing last year. Now that just seems really difficult to envision. Like, yes, I think 14 points per game is a reasonable projection, but like, where is the ceiling, right? And if that's like the median, then that means there's also potential for less than that. And then it's like, okay, is he scoring more points per game than, significantly more points per game than, I don't know, Christian Kirk or even like Nico Collins or whoever. So it's like, it just makes him less exciting. I think it lowers the range of outcomes a little bit. And that's a bummer. So I'm not going to be buying him as much as I was.
Mm-hmm.
I do think his price will probably drop a little bit though.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. I think that people understand that this isn't an ideal spot. So I think the market is going to adjust. And if they overreact, then I'll buy back in, because there's nothing necessarily bad about having a 14 point per game wide receiver on your team, like you said. And if he does drop much further down the ranks, I mean, he will be getting into a territory that's like very palatable, a future second or like a Khalil Herbert or something. Like I'll trade that all day, even if he's on the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. As I'll talk about more in the show, one of my big things is in the late rounds, usually after like the 8th or the 9th, it depends on the year. A lot of these players, we can't really project them to be either meaningful or last a long time on your roster. So like DeAndre Hopkins at 905, you got Keenan Allen at 904, someone like Isaiah Pacheco at 903, Devin Achane at 907. like I'm probably taking the guys who are going to give me some sort of points. But yeah, like you said, 14 points per game. It's not really. I'm not excited about it. When it like the Chiefs were on the table, that could be the same sort of passing volume that the Cardinals utilized to get DeAndre Hopkins last year to like 17 points a game, which is like, yeah, this is when we see the sort of game breaking like pick and definitely really good production. But yeah, I'm not super jazzed about picking him there, but it's okay. I mean, he'll give me enough points where I'm personally okay with it. So yeah, that's about my whole take. I don't really have too much more to say about DeAndre Hopkins.
No, I think that's all he really needs to be said. And with veteran players, like it does help to look at where they go in seasonal drafts to kind
Mhm.
of evaluate, how much of a discount are you getting in Dynasty and is it worthwhile? And I
Yeah.
think, even after these news, Hopkins is still going to be like a late fourth, early fifth round pick in underdog drafts.
Mhm.
So if you're getting that 5 round discount, 4 round discount in Dynasty,
Mhm.
that's still something. Like that's not a bad thing at all. So he can still plug holes for you in certain cases. What about the other pieces here? So Treylon Burks has been kind of a polarizing figure, I'd say. I mean, even since he was a rookie, but post rookie season, just due to the nature of how his rookie season played out, he's been very polarizing because we kind of have a small sample situation paired with a bad offense situation, quarterback questions. It's like nobody really knows what to think about Treylon Burks, but he has been a faller in startup ADP pretty consistently throughout the offseason. And this move's obviously not going to help. Do you think that you might start buying Treylon Burks if he continues to fall, or is this just like you were out and now you're more out? How do you feel about him?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up again because I think we definitely should reiterate that I don't think at this point in this season, Treylon Burks is probably going to eat into any of DeAndre Hopkins like target share or anything like that. I've seen most people who are much smarter than me because I don't do projections projecting him for like a 20 to between 20 and 25% target share, which I think is a reasonable jump from his rookie season, 18%. I don't know. It's sad because I was so pro Treylon. Like I was last offseason between Treylon being before the draft being my wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. I kept flip-flopping. So I love Treylon. I think he's definitely a really talented wide receiver, and at least in college he was. He comes in the league. I mean, he has like the asthma allegations, and then he's not really producing. He gets injured, and he has a pretty underwhelming rookie season. But I think his peripherals were pretty decent. Like he had a 1.75 yards per out run, 18% target share. Like I think we've gotten really used to rookie wide receivers just taking the top off in their rookie season, that we kind of don't realize that rookie wide receivers can have just good rookie seasons and still be buys. So I think with this news, yeah, they gave D Hop a 2-year deal. I'm not a contract expert, but I'm sure that if he kind of flops his first year, they'd be able to get out of it in year 2. And that would, I mean, this year with Treylon, I'm not super excited. I don't know how many targets there are to go around in Tennessee,
Mhm.
like numbers of targets. But if he's getting like a 20 to 22% target share in Tennessee, not really excited about that. So I think there could definitely be a buy lower than we've already seen right now,
Yeah.
a buy lower opportunity later in the season and see what happens year 3. But this year, I'm pretty much out on Treylon, I'd say.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wasn't really buying before. I didn't think he was going to pay off in to such a degree that I couldn't just get in later once I knew that he was good. Like I just wanted to see more of him on the field, and I didn't really think in the context of the Titans offense that he was going to, I don't know, blow the doors off to such a degree that he was going to become like a 3rd round startup pick overnight.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I was kind of content to just wait and see. Like I hadn't really been picking up any shares. And now I don't know. I think I'd be more open to getting in on Burks if his price drops because the existence of Hopkins in the offense doesn't really have any effect on whether or not Burks is good. Like
Mhm.
if he's good, he can still consolidate a large percentage of that offense. Like we
Right.
saw Devonta Smith last year of a 27% target
Mhm.
share alongside AJ Brown and Dallas Goddard. This team is kind of like a poor man's version of that now.
Right.
Like if you think of Hopkins as the AJ Brown and Chigakonkwo as Dallas Goddard, there's
Yeah.
like nothing else. Like the running backs don't catch passes.
Mhm.
Nick Westbrook Akine is not
Not a real
encroaching on
person.
anybody.
No,
He's an NPC.
exactly.
Um, So like Burks, yeah, if he's talented enough to command a 22% target share, he's probably going to have that. And like you said, they can probably get out of Hopkins, or if they're in a position where they want to get out of Hopkins, then he's so washed at that point it won't matter, and Burks can just become the alpha anyway.
Right.
So I'm kind of into the idea of like waiting a couple of months, and if Burks gets off to maybe a slower start and his price kind of plummets, then I'll look into it. But he's not a guy I'm buying to help my team this year, and I think that there are better ways to store dynasty value in his range than to buy him. So it's just he's not really an asset that I want to pursue right now.
Yeah, I pretty much totally agree. Like, I think the whole big thing is that if we see Traylon in the first like 8 weeks not score a lot of fantasy points because he's not getting a lot of targets, we can still look at his peripherals. If his peripherals look promising, we can buy, because usually we see players' prices react to peripherals, not the other way around. So, there's going to be like buy low opportunities if he seems like he's going to be good. If he's not good, then I don't think I'm going to be buying.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, DeAndre Hopkins being there doesn't mean that Traylon Burks is bad. I saw a lot of people saying that, like, oh, now that DeAndre Hopkins is there, you've admitted to the point that Traylon can never be a wide receiver one. I don't think that's true. I think that it kind of sucks this year for Traylon. But I mean, the depth chart was pretty bad. I think them bringing in DeAndre Hopkins makes a lot of sense. Like I said earlier, like I think Ryan Tannehill is a better real life quarterback than people seem to have like remembered.
Hmm.
And the Titans could have kind of sort of tricked themselves into thinking they're competing. Their defense is really good, so I think bringing in D Hop is just sort of the Titans not really caring about the fact that they probably have a worse team than they really do.
Mike Vrabel doesn't know the definition of the word tank.
Okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
I mean, he knows what like the big giant military vehicle is. Like
Sure.
he would probably ride one to the stadium if they let him, but he doesn't know how to tank. He doesn't like he just wants to win football games. Like he
Yeah,
just want like it doesn't matter what the context is. Now, one could ask, if you want to win football games, why bring in Will Levis? But that's a question for another day. We're not going to talk about Will Levis. I do think Tannehill becomes kind of an interesting QB3 type of buy
mhm,
because he's much less likely to get benched in season with Hopkins. Like clearly this is a win now move. They want to win games. Tannehill's not seeing the bench until they're firmly out of contention.
mhm.
And I think we've seen from Vrabel teams long enough that like they are going to stay in contention until the last possible moment just through sheer force of will.
Okay.
So like, yeah, I mean, Tannehill, I think is pretty likely to get 15, 16 starts barring injury. And
Yeah, I
at
think
a
the
very,
same.
very low price.
Yeah,
So
I mean, in the last, it looks like about 6 days here, we've seen Tannehill jump from the 1301 to the 1104. I'm guessing
okay.
that's probably going to kind of calm down to like the 12th round. But I mean, he's the right now in ADP is the QB 33. So at that price, I'm like super in.
Yeah.
But like if he goes up to like the 10th, something crazy like that, like I'm very out. And I don't know what he's looking like an underdog. I think you probably know more than I do. I don't really do underdog drafts.
He's borderline undrafted in
Okay.
most drafts. Now that's going to change. Like he's going to start going in the last couple of rounds, but
Right.
definitely a guy I like over there. And and like at his current price in Dynasty is just like a no brainer because he's being priced outside of the 32 starting quarterbacks in the
Right.
NFL. And like, I don't think he's going to score like the 32nd best starting quarterback. I think
No,
he's more of like a QB 20 to 25 type of projection.
I
And
think that's like
so
probably the low end. Yeah.
that's pretty appealing to me. So I think, it's a certain use case where like you need to go out and trade for a 35-year-old to be your QB3 like in a 1-year rental situation,
Mhm.
but I'd much rather do that than like pay all the way up for Kirk Cousins or something ridiculous like that. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the expense of a
yeah.
13th to 12th round pick, as opposed to a fifth round pick in like
Yeah.
Cousins, Goff, or like Daniel Jones, I'm would so much rather make that move in Ryan
Yeah.
Tannehill.
Exactly. So we'll touch on these quarterbacks a little bit more in the strategy portion. We're gonna jump over to another little segment first before we get to the main part of the show. This is just something new that I want to try out and incorporate, and this is just going to be our trade corner. We've each brought a recent dynasty trade that we've made to discuss, and we're just gonna lay out the context of the trade. What were we thinking at the time? How did this trade get done? And I like this because it's a perfect segue. I actually made a trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Unfortunately, it was prior to the signing, so I'm a little bit less jazzed about it now. But Hopkins was not a throw-in per se, but more of a necessary evil to get the trade done. The main prize of this trade was Justin Fields. So to lay out the context here, this is a very shallow league. So this is a start 9. I only have 2 leagues that are only start 9. Every one of my other leagues is like 10, 11, 12, somewhere in that range. So very shallow starting lineups. It's half PPR. It has some like first down bonus stuff or whatever, but that's too complicated to get into. So just generally a half PPR, super flex, 4-point passing touchdown, start 9. I have Jalen Hurts. My other quarterbacks are Jimmy Garoppolo and, interestingly enough, Ryan Tannehill. And I'm thinking, okay, I have some excess value on my roster. I want to go out and get a second elite quarterback. I don't really want to just ping pong back and forth between Jimmy Garoppolo and Ryan Tannehill all year. In a start 9, any team with 2 good quarterbacks is going to be at a significant advantage because they're scoring a lot of points relative to other positions, and there are fewer of those other position slots to fill. So you can really designate a lot of value to those quarterbacks. So long story short, all the elite quarterback managers kind of shut the door in my face, with the exception of the Fields manager, whose team is just really, really low value. He's going into a rebuild that's probably going to take 2+ years. And I was like, look, like, just to be completely honest with you, like, I would not recommend trading away an elite quarterback in most cases. I think in your case, it makes sense because honestly, Fields is kind of a risky long-term hold anyway. You're not going to need his points this year. Like, just pick up some draft picks, try to re-roll. So this was a long negotiation, but end of the day, this is what the deal looks like. I sent away Devontae Smith, Marquise Brown, my 2024 first rounder, and then I sent him back his 2024 second and third rounder, along with my 2025 second, which I know is a lot of pieces. And then I received Justin Fields and DeAndre Hopkins. So if you think of Hopkins and Marquise Brown as more or less a wash, Marquise goes a little ahead of him, but we'll just call it a wash. Basically traded Devonta Smith, a first, a second, a third, and a future second for Justin Fields. So Malcolm, why don't you give me your immediate impression on that trade?
So when I first looked at it, I saw Devonta Smith, Marquise Brown, and the first, and I just immediately was like, "Ooh, okay, that's a lot. Like we're working with a lot here." But after looking at it for like 10 seconds, I think it's pretty much always going to be a win in your favor for the simple reason of you acquired an elite quarterback and you didn't have to not only give an elite one back, but you didn't have to give any quarterback back. So we'll talk more about Fields later in the show. I'm not the biggest fan of Fields, but regardless, he's about the 110, I think, in startups. And it was sort of like 4 quarters for $1 kind of scenario. Where I like Devonta Smith. Obviously, it must hurt a little bit to break up Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts. Also, as an Eagles fan, it probably hurts a little bit doubly. But I think that winning fantasy games is probably going to be more fun than watching Devonta Smith in one of your agility. So
Yeah,
I
pretty
think
much.
overwhelmingly, this is a really good trade. Like the 201, the third, the second, it's like, I'm a big fan of just sending seconds in offers to get deals done because I think we as drafters and managers, we really overestimate our abilities to like hit on the right players in the second round when like most of the time these are not meaningful players and they're guys that are going like the 9th, 10th through like 12th of startups. So you sent like Devonta Smith, Marquise Brown in the first, and I guess the 201 are the 4 meaningful pieces. Everything else I don't really care about. And you got Justin Fields and D Hop, who, like I said, I'm not out on, I'm not super in on, but like at price, I'm okay with drafting him there. Or trading for him, especially like you said, sending like a mid-future second for him, I'm totally for.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
I definitely, I'm also not really aggressively targeting Fields. It was more
Mhm.
like, okay, what, like, he was the only quarterback in that tier that I could get, and I'm like, okay, I'll take him. Like, I'm not going to be picky. I think he's going to score a lot of points this year. If an opportunity arises to pivot to someone like Herbert or Burrow or even Lawrence, like, I'll probably jump on that. But in the meantime, like, you just got to get in the club because it's so hard to make that kind of a swap without without giving up a quarterback. And this was a unique case where he didn't need a quarterback. He's going to have the 101 this year. He's probably going to have the 101 next year. So he was okay with trading Fields after, a long, long negotiation, and we got it done. And I like what you said about seconds. Like it's definitely something where you need to be willing to trade them. The reason I like to have seconds is because they're like kind of the most liquid trade asset there is. Like
Mhm.
every trade, like it can be hard to trade firsts for players because like the way that I play Dynasty, there's only a handful of players I'm really willing to give up a first rounder for. But if I just have a bunch of seconds, like it's really easy to kind of level out trades with seconds,
Yeah.
like you said. So I was comfortable with that, and I think it really improves my odds to win this year without necessarily decreasing the value of my roster. And yeah, I mean Devonta Smith is a fun player, but I tend to think that he's maybe a little bit overpriced, especially in this half PPR format.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to regret not having him, and then getting Hopkins added back in kind of lets me maintain theoretically that floor of production. So I'm
Right.
happy with it. That was the
Yeah.
thought process, and I think that the format really lends itself to that type of a trade, just given that it's such a shallow lineup. Malcolm, why don't you break down your trade now? It's a little bit less convoluted.
Yes, mine will be really easy to follow. So it's Superflex, PPR, start 10, tight end premium. And the start 10 is just like quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 3 flex, and a Superflex. So basically standard settings, but PPR, not standard. So normal settings. And this was directly after the draft. I sent DeAndre Swift, Kyle Phillips, who plays for the Tennessee Titans, and a 2023 third round pick for Jerry Jeudy. And I did this. It was as soon as DeAndre Swift got that value bump of getting traded to the Eagles. It was right after like my heart was shattered in a billion pieces when I saw they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. I had like I had a good amount of DeAndre Swift where it was it hurt my wallet definitely. But
Yeah.
as soon as he got that value bump, I tried sending Swift for as many I sent out as many offers as I possibly could because people had the Swift takes ready to go on the Eagles. And I'm going to let you in a few seconds talk about your whole Swift take on the Eagles. I agree with it wholeheartedly, and you're much more eloquent than I am. But pretty much, I sent DeAndre Swift and 2 just nothing pieces for Jerry Jeudy. And if you look at
Right.
ADP, DeAndre Swift right now is the 709. Jerry Jeudy's the 506. So they definitely separated in value in the last couple months. I just haven't been making that many trades recently. And a fun little tidbit is the guy's name on Discord was Kyle Phillips Superfan. So I don't know if that really identified the fact that I was able to get the trade done, but I definitely looked at his Discord name and said, I'll throw in Kyle Phillips. And he said, all right, deal. So
There
a
you
little
go.
tidbit
You
about
gotta
if
do
you
a little bit of behind the scenes research. You gotta go deep. Know your
exactly
league, know your league, and if they can put their weaknesses directly into their sleeper username, that's all the better. My
sure.
case against Swift is really just like the Eagles don't throw to running backs.
Mhm.
Swift has some pretty clear deficiencies as a runner, like just based on his deployment last year, based on the fact that the Lions were willing to deal him for a day 3 pick. There's obviously some smoke there, and
Mhm.
so I just think he's a kind of a limited player who does some things well, and I don't think the things that he does well really lend themselves to the Eagles offense. I get that he had high target shares in Detroit. I can't really figure out why the Eagles would choose on any given play to target him and not AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, or Dallas Goddard.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense.
So I
A
just
few
don't think
minutes
they're
ago.
gonna, like, I've heard the argument like, well, yeah, the Eagles didn't throw to their running backs. They didn't have running backs that could catch like DeAndre Swift. Like, yeah, I mean, I get that he's a better receiver than Sanders and Gainwell, but like
Mhm.
he's not a better receiver than the other options that they have on the team. And like we still know that running quarterbacks typically don't check down to running backs. So all in all, it doesn't really set him up for success. Like people saw that he got traded to a high powered offense, I think, and that was the reason for optimism. But as this dust has settled, I think his ADP kind of reflects that people realize now like this isn't the ideal spot. He's going to need to monopolize that Miles Sanders role from last year to really pay off his cost, and I just don't see how that's going to happen when Rashad Penny is like clearly a better rusher and is on the team there. And Jalen Hurts is also going to steal goal line carries. So yeah, it's a full fade for me. I think that was a great trade. Sometimes if you have that player that's kind of radioactive and you don't know how your league feels about them, you just have to spam out offers. So, You just have to look for like lots of different ways to get your deals done, and don't be too picky about what you get back. Like if you really are convinced the player is going to drop in value, just try to get anything that's like not going to tank in value. Like get something that you can just hold on to, give you some flexibility, and then you can, recalibrate later. But I think Judy was a great piece to pick up. Honestly, I'm kind of in the business of buying Judy in certain places, and I'm definitely not in the business of buying Swift. So that's a big win for you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like at the time I was, like 50-50 on Judy. I definitely liked him. I liked his peripherals, but I didn't like the fact that his peripherals have been seemingly good for the last 2 years and he just hasn't really done anything with it. I think there's been a lot of problems in Denver. I mean, seemingly Hackett was a horrible head coach. We don't often see head coaches get fired, halfway through their first year.
Yeah.
But yeah, the more takes I've heard about Judy, it has kind of been like reinforcing that Jerry Jeudy is almost definitely a good wide receiver. And I just figured he was the kind of guy that Swift, I was so concerned with getting him off my roster as soon as possible because I felt like more information was going to come out about like people were going to start wising up to Swift and all the things that you said, like start thinking I feel like the immediate take with Swift was just good, maybe good player on a really good team equals fantasy points, and not that there's three gigantic target eaters eating the targets who of a guy who probably isn't going to score that many points on the ground. Everything that you said basically. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to go get a player who hopefully should maintain value. Like I saw they drafted Marvin Mims, but I didn't feel like that was a super big threat to Jerry Jeudy. And besides that, nothing much changed with the Broncos. It seemed like a more solid situation.
Yeah, for sure.
I just figured, he's probably going to stay the same value or go up. And then he ended
Yeah.
up going up in value by like almost a round and a half. So it was a pretty big win for me on a team that definitely needed it. I think my team, it's a league that me and you are in together where I felt like I was drafting and I was the mark. But instead, it seems like my team is still holding on right now.
Is that the league where you took Trey Lance real early?
I took Trey Lance at the 302, which
Whew.
really hurt because now he's going in like the 7th now. So that hurt he's going in the 8th. So that was really bad. A huge flub on my part. But
yeah, it happens.
If he gets the job, then I'm good and I'm a genius and I knew it the whole time. And if not, I'm gonna need more trades like that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I mean, Lance was really hard to see coming. I mean, he really like I don't know if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons before, if you're like familiar with it at all, but like when you play, you like roll a d20.
Yeah.
I'm really just like exposing my whole nerddom here. I mean, I have a Dynasty Football podcast, so like it's
right.
obviously I'm a nerd.
Last week you talked about the Pokemon League and everything.
Oh yeah, that's right. I have the
Talking about
Pokemon League.
Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons.
no, I have just like a collection of just like embarrassing hobbies. But this is a recent one. But you roll a d20, and if you get a 1, like really bad, like a natural 1, really bad things happen. I feel like Lance has rolled like 3 1s in a row to start his career. Like it's unbelievable how unfortunate he's been for a number 3 overall pick. I'm just becoming less and less confident that he will ever start games for the 49ers, but I do think he'll start games for somebody at some point. And, you just have to kind of cross your fingers at this point. It's like, you're not really getting anything for him in trades. I got really lucky in the sense that the leagues that I had him in where he got hurt, I mostly was trading him away because I had him in like more competitive spots, and he was still kind of holding most of his value even after the injury. So I kind of just got lucky and ended up like pivoting off of a lot of my shares, not because I had like my third eye open and I saw where this was going, but it just sort of worked out for me. So I only have like 1 or 2 shares left, and so I'm not really sweating it as much. But I feel bad for the bag holders. And I think Chris is another one. I think he has a lot of Lance as well. So he had a bunch of Lance and Swift too. You guys were both going down with the same ships.
Yeah, I was pretty happy. I was able to offload all of my Swift for like pretty good prices. I'd say I can't recall exactly what I offloaded the rest of the Swift was, or what I offloaded the rest of the Swift for, what the offers were. But yeah, Lance, my very first article for DFF was a case for Trey Lance. So I am through and through a Lance bag buyer, bag holder. I think at this point you can't really sell him. I see most people just saying that even if he doesn't play for the Niners, which is looking extremely likely, as much as it
Yeah.
pains me to say, he'll get a job somewhere else. Like the only guys who really haven't gotten a good shot somewhere else are like Josh Rosen, who was horribly bad. I think also he like as soon as he got drafted, I remember the thing saying like he said there's like 10 mistakes ahead of me. There's a lot of problems with Josh Rosen. Where
Right.
Lance at least seems like maybe a more like Sam Darnold type where he has a really good attitude. I think he could probably like will his way to start for 5 or 6 different teams. And I
Hopefully not 5 or 6 different
yeah,
teams. In
hopefully
that
just like
case,
for
it'd be
one other
horribly
team
wrong.
for my sake.
Yeah.
But if he needs the chances, I hope he'll get them. But hopefully he just needs one other chance, and hopefully it's on the Vikings, which I've seen a lot of people
Oh,
saying.
yeah, there you go.
That would be great, but who knows? There's 31 other teams. He could go reasonably to like, I don't know, 10 of them.
I think
Uh,
the possibility that Trey Lance could play for the Minnesota Vikings is, like, enough reason to make Jamar Chase the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty.
okay.
Like, just the 5 like, even if it's a 5% chance that Justin Jefferson has Trey Lance as his quarterback at some point, I think that's enough to, like, make the switch.
So you're totally out on Lance and just
I'm out on Lance as the quarterback for my fantasy weapons.
okay. That
I
makes sense.
yeah,
If
I
Lance was your real life team's quarterback, how would you feel?
pretty sad because Jalen Hurts
Okay,
is a lot better than him, and I
that's
wouldn't
fair.
wanna yeah. No, I understand your question. I mean, it would definitely be preferable to, like, trotting out Sam Howell
Mhm.
or I don't know, like, who are the other quarterback like Derek Carr. Like, I'd
Desmond
rather have
Ridder.
Trey Lance be my
Yeah.
starter than Derek Carr. Like,
Mhm.
there's at least some hope there, right?
Right, or like Jimmy G, guys like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it wouldn't be a death sentence. Like, at least there's upside there, right? We don't actually know if he's bad. He's probably bad because the 49ers think he's bad and they have
Yeah.
every reason to want him to be good,
Mhm.
but we don't know it for sure. And
Yeah.
he still is young enough that he could potentially get better. So yeah, that was a little detour there on Lance. Just don't buy any more shares. Like, you can keep your ones that you have if you want, but don't buy more. If you're gonna buy more, like, please just call 1-800-GAMBLER and get the help that you need.
I
Um,
totally agree. I
let
do not advocate for buying more Lance, but if you
uh,
have Lance, I am of the firm
yeah,
belief you should hold him. If
and
you
if you
bought him for a real like, it's sort of
yeah,
not a good logic, but I think you should hold him if you have him.
yeah, that's called, what is that called? That's
Some
called
cost fallacy.
there's a fallacy there, yes, a cost fallacy or
Yeah.
the endowment effect, which is
Mhm.
like things that you have are more valuable than things that you don't have.
Absolutely.
All the fallacies are in play with Lance. His whole
Right.
career has been a fallacy so far. Let's
Yep.
get into the main segment of this show.
Yep.
So we're almost 40 minutes in.
Yeah,
We
let's
had a nice little detour there.
talk meat
So
and potatoes.
you wrote a piece, strategy guide for the DFF startup guide, and I thought it was really good. And so when you were already planning to come on the show, I was like, perfect, let's talk about that. And so you have taken the 4 positions and really broken down like how to approach those positions in startups. And I think it's stuff that's also applicable to existing leagues. So we're just going to go through that piece. I'm going to let you talk about each position. You started the piece out with a quote. Well, it was your own quote, I think, but you said you put it in bold because I guess it was important. You said good managers select good players, but great managers build winning rosters. So why don't you just start out by explaining what that means?
Yeah, so like I said a little bit earlier, my process, amongst many things, is really just getting to starting elite quarterbacks if you can. But that just goes into the bigger idea of you have to have some rhyme or reason when you're selecting players. You can go through a draft and just select the players with the highest ADP or the players with the highest keep trade cut value. But at that point, you may as well just be on auto draft, just picking the players with the highest ADP and the most value, just with no reason. Like imagine you would not do a build where you select Christian McCaffrey and then sell all your other players for rookie picks. It just wouldn't make any sense because you have one very valuable competing piece and then a bunch of rebuilding pieces. So that's
Hmm.
the whole meaning of the quote is just you need to have some sort of reason when you're constructing your roster. I think that you can get lucky when you select players, or you can get confirmation bias in you think you're a really good drafter, but it takes a lot of strategy and it takes a lot of knowledge to actually build a roster that can win.
Right. So you're talking about roster construction, and that's kind of like how you allocate your value across positions. So
Mhm.
in terms of a snake draft, that's like what rounds are you prioritizing what positions? It's like a big thing in best ball, right? Like you draft in a best ball league, if you draft a quarterback in the second round, you don't want to draft two more quarterbacks soon, or you don't want to draft like a second quarterback in round 5. Like you need to spread out the value that you lock into different positions so that you can create like the most balanced or like win, give you the best chance to win based on how you're distributing those positions. So the same thing applies in Dynasty. And the same thing would apply to any format, like an auction league, right? It would just be dollar amounts at different positions as opposed to what rounds you're selecting players. But the same thing holds true. You need to allocate a certain percentage of your team's value into these different positions. And as you've stated, you think quarterbacks deserve that top spot, that priority value. So why is it that we should be devoting so much value into quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think we can definitely just jump right into the theory. So quarterbacks, far and away, hands down, I think extremely limited argument against it is that quarterbacks are the most important position in Superflex Dynasty in like any reasonable scoring. And I think a lot of people, they know this, but they draft in a way that does not agree with this. I see a lot of people talk about quarterback as the most important position, far and away. But then you look at ADP and you see Justin Jefferson goes to the 106 before Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Where I think I really had to hammer it home that you need to be selecting the first 12 elite quarterbacks before almost any other player in Dynasty. I said that there are 12 elite quarterbacks in Dynasty, which are Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, just the first 12 in ADP. And it goes all the way
Run us through
through.
that end of that group.
Yes, because it gets a little muddy in ADP right now, but it goes QB 10 is Deshaun Watson, QB 11 is Dak Prescott, and an ADP QB 12 is Bryce Young. But not my QB 12, but above Bryce Young would absolutely be QB 13 in Kyler Murray. I think you've
Okay.
talked a lot about Kyler Murray on the show. This whole show could be Kyler Murray propaganda.
I'm
But
kind of a Kyler Murray fan. That is true.
yeah,
And are you including Anthony Richardson in this group as well?
I am including Anthony Richardson. Anthony
Okay.
Richardson is QB 9 on startup ADP right now,
Yeah.
which
Oh,
I
yeah.
think
His price is really, really high. I was just curious if you were including him. I mean, it makes sense based on like he has the upside to score
right.
like these other guys, whereas like Young and Stroud, it's a lot more
Mhm.
narrow for them to get into that tier just because of how good they'd have to be as passers. Whereas like the case for Anthony Richardson is basically just Justin Fields. Like
Right.
he's not a good passer, still scored a ton of fantasy points, goes in the first round of startups. Like he's Justin Fields with more value insulation basically at this point.
Yeah.
So I think he deserves consideration in that group. I'd still rather have Kyler, despite the disparity in price. But yeah, so those are your 12 guys. And continue please with the point you're making.
Yeah, so the first 12, which our analysts, I'd say, did a pretty good job. They selected the first 12 in the first 17 picks of the mock drafts. That means there were 5 other players that got in there, which I'd say is pretty good. For the most part, I'm a little biased. I think our analysts know what they're talking about. And then the other 3 in the first 15 that I think should be Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Bijan Robinson. Those 3 are the ones that you can make the case for selecting them over certain quarterbacks. Obviously, you should never be selecting, say, Bijan Robinson over Patrick Mahomes, but ADP knows that. Sometimes Jefferson goes above, like I said, Lamar, or Trevor Lawrence, and Jamar Chase sometimes goes above those guys too, along with Bijan. But I think for the most part, as long as the first 15 picks are those 12 quarterbacks and those 3 other non-quarterbacks, the league is looking pretty good. Like, you're in a league that knows what it's doing. But ADP doesn't agree with this. Like, you have, like we said, Kyler Murray goes to the 304 right now. There's a lot of really terrible discourse about Kyler Murray on Twitter recently, where they're saying he has, the same stuff in the last 2 years. The Call of Duty jokes. They're saying he can't stay healthy, which all of it just doesn't make any sense. It's really bad.
Mhm.
Along with Dak Prescott, who's QB 11. You talked a lot about him on the show last week, which I highly recommend going and listening to, so I can save my breath. But those guys should be going in the first 12 picks, in my opinion, and not a round and almost a half later.
And that's pretty aggressive. I mean, that's a very aggressive stance based on their value. So why would you say Prescott or Kyler should be going ahead of somebody like, I don't know, Chris Olave or Jonathan Taylor?
Right. So I think that, and I would say that the whole thing with drafting is that you should be looking for values. Obviously, if you don't have to draft Kyler Murray until, I don't know, say the 206, there's no reason to take him at the 106. You should wait around. But in a
Right.
perfect world, if I had to, I would take Kyler Murray as early as the 12th pick, just because, or even the 11th pick, just because someone like Chris Olave, I mean, if you look, or Olave, if you look at his points per game last season, he had 13.4 on a 26% target share. That's definitely good for a rookie, but Kyler Murray has blown the door off of fantasy for 4 years, and now he gets injured and all the narratives start forming. Like, he just signed I think it was like a $250 million contract. He's objectively a really good real life quarterback, fantasy quarterback, and quarterback objectively scores the most
Yeah,
points.
but Malcolm, his contract had a stipulation about having to
The
study
work
film
ethic, and he
outside
has
of
to watch
yeah,
film. Yeah,
yeah.
so the great thing was that they actually removed that. That was good. I don't know if it ever existed ever. It was just something that I could totally see someone like Dov Kleiman just saying and having no source.
I
Um,
think it was like some pettiness with with like the GM or whoever. Like I think it's important to note that the head coach and general manager got fired and they retained Kyler Murray. Like I think that says enough to me. That says enough about how the Cardinals as an organization felt about everything. It's not. It didn't go the other way around. You know, like in San Francisco, they're like, no, Brock Purdy's the starter, and like also we probably like Sam Darnold more than Trey Lance. Like that's not what's happening in Arizona. They're like, yeah, obviously Kyler's the guy. We just like had to get rid of those other idiots, and we'll be ready for Kyler when he's back, and we'll probably draft Marvin Harrison for him next year. Like
right.
it's very different, you know. So yeah, I think all that's stupid, but I've talked about it on
Mhm.
probably 8 straight shows. So we'll stick with the value here. I think the problem, like you said, people don't draft as if quarterback is the most important position. I think it's just because people think they have the strategy of like, I can address the position later. Like it's an
Yeah.
important position, but I can address it later. And so they're not, it's important, but they're not prioritizing it. It's like you can say that the food you eat is like obviously more important than like, I don't know, your iPhone or like going out or whatever. But then you spend like a lot more money on nice, fun luxury items than you spend on like buying quality produce. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like you can say, the way that we rationalize our philosophy and the way that we act it out is very different. And so teams will be like, well, yeah, quarterbacks are important, but I can just draft Jared Goff later. I can just draft Geno Smith later. The problem is you can't replicate the top end production of elite quarterbacks. Like
Mhm.
if you look at the current quarterback landscape, all of the top scoring ones are also the young ones that are at the top of the dynasty startups. Like it's very different at wide receiver. Just for an example, you can get Cooper Cup and Devontae Adams in the 4th round. You can get Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins in the 8th round. You can get Tyler Lockett later than that. Those guys can come pretty close to replicating what maybe not Jefferson, but I mean Cup could. But the next tier of guys, like those guys can totally match step for step with CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can get that type of production later. So in that sense, the wide receivers are far more of a luxury pick than the quarterbacks because you can't just go draft a quarterback in round 5 or 6 or 7 that's going to be able to keep up with the top end guys. Maybe one or two every season is going to come out of nowhere and have kind of a miracle season, but it's not something you can project.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Like, Justin Jefferson, we all know he's the best wide receiver in the league. He's the best wide receiver for fantasy, and he still got outscored by Austin
Second
Eckler, who
best.
who go second best. Oh, okay. Oh, right. I forgot your Jamar Chase take. But according to ADP and by rational sane people, he's the best wide
Okay.
receiver in fantasy and in the real life. He still got outscored by Austin Eckler, who goes 3 rounds later. Like you were saying, you just don't see these quarterbacks, these top 12, usually get outscored by guys who go much later. Like they happen to be pretty young, under 30. And I think Dak is like just kissing 30. And they also happen to be the best quarterbacks in fantasy and some of the best quarterbacks in the league. So yeah, I totally agree with all that. I think that all just makes perfect sense. And like I said, ADP is not exactly reflective of real leagues. It is pretty close, but our analysts, they took these top 12 quarterbacks in the first 17 picks. Like we did a pretty good job. That's the first round and a half. So don't think that you can go into a startup and get Kyler Murray at 304 because there's a really good chance he's not going to be there. address it
Yeah,
with
it
your
depends
second
who you're
pick.
playing with, right?
Yeah,
Like you have to know if you're playing with sharp people, like you're playing with people that are in a lot of leagues, the quarterbacks are going to go earlier because they've been around long enough to probably know, the impact that the quarterbacks have. And by the way, just how hard it can be to trade for them after the fact.
right.
Kyler Murray has become acquirable mostly because I think he was on a lot of competitive dynasty teams when he got hurt, and then those teams like stayed competitive, and he's not useful to
Yeah.
that team, and so they're willing to deal him. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to get these guys. Whereas like Chris Olave, like you can trade for Chris Olave, you can trade for Jahmyr Gibbs, like maybe not that specific player in your specific league. Maybe they're
Right.
held by somebody that values them, but someone in that tier, like you
Right.
can go out and get a top end wide receiver. You just have to be creative about it, or you can go get a top end running back. I know I said that I traded for Justin Fields, but like
Mhm.
that was a very specific circumstance, and it was a very hard trade to get done, and it was the only way I could get that kind of a trade done in that league. And I haven't had success in most
In
of my
all
leagues
your
this
other leagues.
offseason. Yeah,
Yeah.
going to get those trades. So it just also is very hard to get the quarterbacks. And if you draft them in rookie drafts, I mean, first of all, most quarterbacks don't turn into that. Like
Right.
the most likely outcome for CJ Stroud, unfortunately, is that he's something between Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr. Like that's the
Mhm.
most likely outcome. For him to become Dak Prescott would be such a massive win. I don't think people understand that,
Yeah.
especially given the weapons they have in Houston. The fact that he doesn't ever scramble, like
Mhm. Or
it's
like
going to be
Bryce
very
Young
difficult for
situation.
him. So
Yeah.
you can't just say like, oh well, I'll just draft the rookies and wait till they become elite. Like it might not ever happen, and it's just so much better to just get in on the ground floor with these quarterbacks in the startup. So trade up, trade up if you can. And the advice for existing leagues, I know I've been talking for a while. It's hard to give advice on this particular topic because genuinely, it's just there's not a lot of flexibility. My only advice is like just knock on every door. Like if you don't have two elite quarterbacks, if you don't have one elite quarterback, especially, go knock on every door. See if you can offer some of your blue chip pieces. Like if you do have a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave or Brees Hall, and you don't have an elite quarterback, find a way to make that deal because the elite quarterback should be like that's the foundation. Like it would be great to have a Garrett Wilson or a Brees Hall, but like that's the game room that you build onto your house like after you have the whole house built. Like you need to build the foundation first.
Right. Yeah, and the good part about what you said, that every team should, like most teams have one elite quarterback, is that at least this year there's 12. So doing the math, in most normal leagues, every team should have an elite quarterback. You should walk out of every startup with at least one. If you're not walking out of your startup with at least one, in my opinion, I think you've kind of done something wrong.
Yep.
So I think I'm not going to explain warp. I think you should definitely go. I'm mostly reading off the strategy article, like we said, and you should definitely go read it because there's some pictures involved in it, and I go much more deeper in depth. But just moving really succinctly, wins over replacement player or warp. You can see that the line for quarterbacks going to the top 12 is above every other position. That means that quarterbacks give you an extra win or essentially more points than every other position available in fantasy football for the most part. Like overwhelmingly, in at least in 2020 to 2021, that's how it was. They usually give you more wins, which is what we do in fantasy football. We don't construct the prettiest rosters. We construct rosters that can win weeks. So they
Yep.
give you the most wins per week and the most wins and the most weekly wins per season is
Yeah.
these
My,
top 12 quarterbacks.
my question, because I haven't worked much with wins over replacement, is that different from value over replacement player? Do you know if that's like a different metric?
Right. So Adiko, which is where I'm getting most of the data from, and you should totally follow on Twitter. He's an amazing analyst. Has kind of defined WARP versus wins against replacement, whereas WARP is looking at the wins that a replacement player, that a very blue chip player gives over like a waiver wire pickup. The
Mhm.
waiver wire pickup being kind of the baseline,
Yeah.
and wins against replacement looks at, I believe it's the I'm not totally positive on it because it was super confusing and it's sort of hard to explain, but it gives you like the wins that a more normal player would give you. And it talks more specifically about the wins that that it gives against your roster as opposed to the wins that different players give you per week. But you can
Gotcha.
I attached it in the article. I gave you a whole article to read about wins over replacement player. because I think I didn't explain it very well, but Adiko explains it super well. So you, again, read the draft strategy article. It's super good. I'm about
Yeah,
to.
and check out Adiko's work on
Mhm.
Twitter. I'm just pulling up his handle. It's Adiko_FF, spelled ADEIKO. He is very smart, much smarter than both of us, and
Yeah.
he does do a lot of really cool charting work.
Mhm.
I know that all sounded a little bit wonky,
Mhm.
but the bottom line is in a given season, your top end quarterbacks are going to contribute more to overall wins than the top end players at other positions. And so that's compounded in Dynasty where those players are even harder to get as well. And so, having two of them gives you an even bigger advantage because it's just so much harder to do. And then they also last, like they maintain value. Like I look back at my startups from years ago, the wide receivers going in the first few rounds, it's laughable. I mean, Michael Thomas was
Mhm.
going in the top 5 of my startups 3 years ago. And I understand like injuries are mainly what derailed
Right.
his career, but you look at Juju Smith-Schuster,
Exactly.
Chris
That's what I was
Godwin,
thinking of. Yeah.
Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, like these were the guys, and none of them have paid off. Like none of
Yeah.
them have even remotely lived up to the price that you paid. Even guys like Hopkins, Hill, and Adams, they've had great years, but their window of utility is just shorter.
Mhm.
Where like, yes, they've helped you win, but Patrick Mahomes or even like, someone less expensive, someone like Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray, like they've helped you win just as much and they still have that value and they'll continue to have that value. So it's just such a big ask for the skill position players going in that range to really pay off versus the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that that's something that gets really attributed to wide receivers, but we don't actually really see it happen that often. Where
Yeah.
people always say wide receivers, they maintain their value way more than running backs because they don't get injured. And while that could be true, that wide receivers get injured less than running backs, a lot of the times they just don't put up the points to maintain their value, and they lose value as about as fast as a running back who like got a sprained ankle. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I agree. Quarterback, it's like I said in the article, it's basically cheating. They score the most points, they give you the most wins, they hold their value the longest, and they're also worth the most. There should be no reason to not take them.
Yeah. And to not trade for them when you have the
Right,
chance.
right.
So let's move on to the other onesie position, and then we can get on to the running back wide receiver talk and continue that. The tight end position is the other one that is difficult to navigate in startups and in our existing leagues because there is kind of a shortage in the supply. Now, whereas in Superflex, you can start 2 quarterbacks. Usually you're not starting 2 tight ends. You probably don't want one in your flex. So there's less demand for the position, but it does have some similarities with quarterback where you have this top end advantage. And then you have kind of a flat tier where there's maybe kind of some, I don't know, lower value against replacement. So how do you handle the tight end position in startups?
So the 15 players that I talked about before, the top 12 quarterbacks, and then Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, in my humble opinion, I think are the only 15 players you could possibly select before Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. I'm that serious about getting a top tight end, meaning I would take them at the 16th and 17th pick in a startup. I think that I think they're the second most important position in Dynasty, and you have to move mountains to acquire an elite one. I think you've talked a little bit more on the show in the past about how it's really impossible to get an elite tight end unless you have one of those almost elite ones. But I think that they're really hard to get, so you should just handle getting one in a startup if you can. And from what I said that I would take them at the 16th or 17th pick. You can get Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews consistently in the third round. Most of my
Yeah.
startups this year, I've been leaving them with 2 elite quarterbacks and Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. And I've from there, I could just go on auto draft the rest of the draft and I'd be happy with it because getting those 3 guys
Yeah.
or 2 elite quarterbacks and an elite tight end, I think is just the most important thing you could possibly do. And people don't draft like that, but everyone seems to kind of know it.
Yeah, I definitely think Pitts and Andrews are undervalued. I'm sure that I've said it before. And if you do like a third round reversal startup, it
Mhm.
works really nicely to go and like if you're in the back end of the draft, you take like Trevor Lawrence 109, and then you take Kyler Murray on the way back, and then you get that early third round pick, and you just grab whoever's left of Pitts or Andrews. that really sets you up nicely to build out the rest of your team, knowing you have those positions locked up. In existing leagues, I'm sending out offers aggressively for Pitts and Andrews because basically, the chart, if you look back at the chart you talked about, it has all these little colorful lines for different positions. And you can see that the top end tight ends are also contributing significant wins over replacement players, whereas those kind of mid tier guys aren't.
Mhm.
So I think you've studied a little bit more than me. What is that chart telling us about the tight ends that come after kind of the Pitts Andrews range?
Right. So the first chart that I have looks just at 2020 through 2021, but the league has changed in the past few years. We've seen a more pass heavy league, things like that. Or we've seen the league hasn't gotten more pass heavy, but the quarterbacks have gotten better at completing their passes. So that's why a lot of people think the league is more pass heavy. But if you actually look
Oh
at the
yeah.
pass attempts, it's been mostly the same in the last 10 years average. Either way, the second chart I look at, it shows the WARP predictions, which is not the same as end of year wins over replacement. This is predicting the WARP for the upcoming year. And we see that quarterbacks overall, meaning the ones who get drafted, also finish way higher than every other position because we're really, really good at predicting the quarterbacks who will be productive because quarterback productivity usually comes down to rushing ability, and we usually know who will rush. But what we see is that the number one tight end is then besides quarterback the most important position in WARP because tight end is super predictable. I went more into it in the strategy guide, but pretty much everyone knows that Travis Kelsey for the last like 7 years has just been the tight end 1, 2, or 3 because he's just so good, and we know he's going to continue being good. And
Mhm.
obviously, not everyone is Travis Kelsey. I think a lot of people say that Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts will be the next Travis Kelsey. That's a big ask. But Mark Andrews has shown that production in the past, and Kyle Pitts has shown that peripherals.
Yeah.
So what we see is that the predictiveness of tight ends means that we should be taking them because we know they're going to be scoring a lot of points.
Do you think though do you think that Travis Kelsey's just like his run of dominance coinciding with the sample size here for this chart is like skewing the data? Because like it is kind of a small sample situation where like, yeah, he's been really good for this whole stretch, but like what if
Right.
I don't know, what if the whole thing is just like him predictably being awesome?
Right. So then the next two we see, they're lower than running back because in the past 7, 8 years, running back has been a more important position than wide receiver. But we still see the next two be higher than wide receiver, meaning that the tight end 2 and the tight end 3 every week will give you an extra or will give you more wins against your opponent than the wide receiver that would be taken in the same spot would be. So that even still goes to show that even if you don't have the number one tight end, the second or third can still give you a lot of wins.
Right. And is that now that chart is using redraft ADP, right? It's
Mhm.
based on redraft. So it's not saying like where you draft Pitts in a dynasty startup
Right,
versus the wide receivers. It's saying in a seasonal draft, the second or the third tight end being drafted
right.
over this sample was on average more valuable than the wide receivers in that range. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And that's
Okay.
going to show that. I mean, I think in redraft this year, Kyle Pitts is maybe like fifth or sixth. I think guys like George Kittle and even maybe Evan Ingram might be going over him. Like guys like that who we know in Dynasty, they're worth much less because, I mean, they're older, they've been injured, or we know they're not showing the same peripherals that someone like Kyle Pitts has. But I know this show is a friend of Kyle Pitts. I'm a big, big supporter in Kyle
Yeah.
Pitts. And we'll see over the next, few years if everything pans out with Kyle Pitts that the tight ends who score the most will also then be at the highest in ADP. And it won't just be they're the highest in
Yeah.
ADP because they're young or they have scored in the past like it is right now.
Right. I've been drafting the heck out of Kyle Pitts in best
Mhm.
ball drafts. He goes so late. He goes like the end of the sixth round.
Mm.
He's like the tight end 6. He goes after Dallas Goddard. He goes like just ahead of Darren Waller. I mean,
Mhm.
it's beautiful. I'm gonna have like 40% exposure.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic case of just he got hurt last year and
Mhm.
now he's on an offense that's been labeled as unexciting, and
Right.
like that's kind of it. And he still has that ceiling. Like he had his peripheral numbers last year. I read them out on one of the episodes I did. they were outlandish. Like
Yeah.
if you take that, over the course of a full season and you just put it into, an average or even a below average offense in terms of pass attempts, like he's going to smash. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I think the reason that we're targeting him and Mark Andrews, like Andrews has had a tight end one overall season. Like
Mhm.
he did it before,
Right.
and he did it by outplaying Travis Kelsey, in that season. So we
Yeah.
know he has that in him. He's only 27. It's a pretty cut and dry case. Pitts just has shown us everything that we could possibly want to see to suggest that he can do that. It's really just about whether the situation will align. But if it does align, he's like 22. I literally think he's still 22 years old.
Yeah.
Um, he could become, he really could be like a Travis Kelsey. He wouldn't play the same way. Like
Mhm.
he has a different style of play, but he could dominate volume and become like a perennial 1,200-yard tight end
Yeah.
at his age. Like that would be an unbelievably valuable asset in Dynasty. So for the opportunity, like for that, just for that chance, I am aggressively sending out offers in my existing leagues for Pitts and Andrews. I think I've drafted one of them in every startup I've done this offseason.
Mhm.
Maybe all but one. I genuinely think I've gotten them. And every time it was in the third round. I mean,
Yeah.
it's free money. Like
Yeah.
there's no reason that it should be a choice between them and um I don't know,
Chris Olave.
Devontae Smith
Yeah.
or like Mark Andrews is going after Tyreek Hill. Like I would
Mhm.
much rather have Mark Andrews because he can offer you actually more wins over replacement
Right.
in his peak season. He's also younger. Like
Yeah.
and he plays a position that ages better. So like it's a no-brainer to prefer Mark Andrews. Um Even somebody like Jahmyr Gibbs, like I love Gibbs. I think he's super
Mhm.
exciting, but I don't see how there's an argument to
Yeah.
take him over the tight ends. Just knowing how scarce that position is, how hard it is to find elite production, you know, uh, you can say Pitts hasn't shown it. Like obviously Gibbs hasn't shown it either. Like he's a
Mhm.
rookie. So
Yeah. No, exactly.
yeah,
I mean, I think Pitts has definitely shown it in some way. Like I mean, I think on this show, chances are, if you're listening, you know to look at peripherals. His rookie season was incredibly amazing. It was like the best rookie season ever in peripherals.
let's just look at his box score. He had 1,000 receiving
Yeah, I
yards.
mean,
Like
and
it's
then
not even doesn't even require peripherals. Like
and
last year does because they didn't throw the ball the
the
whole
the
time that
whole
he was
thing is that
healthy.
his peripherals were so good his rookie season, and then his sophomore season, they got better and he got cheaper. Like, what are we doing here, folks?
Yeah, they got better and he got cheaper because Marcus Mariota was like the worst quarterback in the league, and Arthur Smith didn't let him throw the ball. And the pass attempts per game, like for the games, because it got higher at the end of the year. So
Mhm.
like if you look at their overall pass attempts per game, that
Yeah,
doesn't even that's already the lowest in the league. That
right.
doesn't even do justice to how low it was when he was playing.
Yeah,
Because when
exactly.
Mariota was starting, it was like they were playing like 1980s football. Like they
Yeah,
were not throwing at all. It wasn't until Ritter came in that it got up to like 28, 29, which is
yeah,
still low.
but it was after
Um,
Pitts was injured for the most
exactly.
part.
I mean, it was unbelievably low. Like yeah. So looking at his per route stats, he was every bit as dominant. He was more dominant than his rookie season in terms of volume. Of the all his share of the
Yeah,
pie as it was. It was
and
just
I
a
think
really small
Arthur
pie.
Smith might be a dynasty gamer because he's generously allowing a huge buy low window to open, which is awesome for us.
Yeah. So we can do a little insider trading with Arthur Smith, pick up
Mhm.
our pitch shares
Yeah,
and just ride them all the way to the moon. Um, we'll see. Maybe it's not this year that he breaks fantasy, but I'm pretty confident like if
I'm
he's
buying
healthy,
Trevor.
he's going to have enough point. Like he's going to score. Maybe he won't match Kelsey and Andrews this year just because they're
Mhm.
in just much better spots. But like I don't think it should be at all surprising if he's the tight end 3, even in
Yeah,
that offense. Like, there's not a lot of competition for that spot. So, yeah, just go get him. I've said it before. I'm not paying the market price on TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Dallas Goddard, specifically in Dynasty. Um, Obviously, that chart that you showed is for redraft ADP, but those are like your mid tier guys, your mid
mhm,
round guys. They are not likely to help your team enough to pay off their price.
no,
They're too expensive. They're being priced up because of that scarcity at the position. It's
right,
just that they are less likely to actually provide that value over the replacement players of like
mhm,
Darren Waller, Evan Ingram, Dalton Schultz. So where what you're giving up just isn't proportional to what you're getting back.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the only one I would make the case more for George Kittle over TJ Hawkinson, just because Kittle has shown in the past that he can be one of, if not the best tight end in the league.
Yeah.
He's also scored a ton. Like last year, he was the tight end 2 in points per game. I think a lot of that was 7 manufactured touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. Who knows? I mean, he's clearly an extremely dominant player, and I think his
Yeah.
price right now at 604 is, granted, this is in non-tight end premium leagues, but 604 is, I'd take the swing at him right there, but much more so over TJ Hawkinson, who goes at the 409. Hawkinson's really overpriced, but you've talked about him before. We're anti Hawkinson, we're pro Pitts. And me personally, I'm okay with getting Kittle on my team just because of, like you said, that demand.
Yeah, I mean, at that cost, I guess I'm okay with it.
Right.
I'm not excited about it. Yeah, 604. Yeah, I mean,
He's 30 years old, but
yeah, that's what I was gonna
what,
say. Like
like,
he's
it's hard to
30,
deny he
and
was
you
the
you
tight
look
end
at
too.
you look at the Niners. It's like he doesn't. I don't even put a lot of stock in projections, but like when
Mhm.
you try to look at how the Niners target distribution works out, it's like so hard to
Yeah,
get any of them into a place that's exciting because
right.
there's so many talented players there. And I mean, most likely one of them's going to get hurt and then it doesn't matter. Like the other
Right.
ones will absorb the target share that the other
Mhm.
one left behind. Um, but it is tough. It's tough for me to justify it.
Right.
He does have those big spike weeks, which is nice.
Yeah.
You know, he can win you some weeks that way with those
He
big
definitely
spike
loses
games.
you some weeks.
So, yeah. So he's not, I mean, he's not the worst player to roster, but I would definitely rather go for somebody like Pat Fryermuth, who's cheaper.
Mhm.
I'd rather pick up Darren Waller if you want to try to get that like elite upside at a discount.
Mhm.
He's only like a year and a half older than Kittle. He's just kind of run cold lately, but he has way less competition for targets.
Right. And I think there's
Um,
one more
yeah,
you forget that you mention just about every week on the show.
Greg Dulcich,
Yes.
by Greg Dulcich,
Okay.
obviously, but he's not really. I don't think he's much of a like this year play. I mean, he could do well this year. Like I think he could be a tight end 1 for sure. But he's probably not going to be like a
Right.
huge difference maker for you. But he's cheap, so I like
Yeah.
him, and I definitely like him long term. So
He
I've
can
been
get
buying
you
him.
into that range to be able to tier up to one of the elite ones. And I think that's like it's really hard to get an elite tight end in the same way it's really hard to get an elite quarterback without giving up a
Yeah,
mid one in return.
yeah. I broke down a trade. I don't know if I broke down the full trade last week. I mentioned a trade that I made to get to trade off of Kyler actually because I had too many. I had 3 elite quarterbacks. I needed to get help elsewhere. Within that trade, I actually made a move of Dulcich to Goddard, which is not something I would normally do, but I was able to get it. I was able to get it done in the trade and still really like the trade in terms of value for me.
Mhm.
And the reason I did that is because I've been in talks with the Pitts manager about a trade, and he's been hesitant to tear down his tight end that far. So I was like, okay, well, I'm making this other deal. Let me get a better tight end. So now I can go back to the Pitts manager with a better tight end and be like, look, see, it's not even that different. Like, look,
Right.
Goddard's like basically as good as
Mhm.
Pitts. So like, let's just make a swap, right? So you can think that kind of stuff through, play some 4D chess and try to move around within the tight end tiers because it is kind of a psychological thing for managers with it being such a scarce position. Like when you have a good one, they don't really want to give them up unless they're getting a good one back.
Yeah. And I would say that, and I think you'd probably say the same thing, that if you have a good one, don't give it up. It doesn't even matter if you get a good one back, just don't give it up. They're so rare. If you have
Yeah.
Andrews, if you have Pitts, hold them literally forever until the league folds or they retire, which
Yeah,
could
to be
be,
clear, those 2 guys, like we're not talking about
yeah,
other tight
not, you
ends.
can move TJ Hawkinson. I'm okay with
You
that.
should move TJ
You
Hawkinson
should
at
move
his
TJ
price.
Hawkinson.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he should not be on your he is unrosterable at his current price.
I agree. I
He's
agree.
going like directly beside Josh Jacobs and Travis Etienne, and he's going ahead of Tony Pollard. I mean,
Right.
it's ahead of Devontae Adams. I mean,
It's pretty
it's
bad.
egregious. It's
Yeah.
horrible. Get him off your teams. Let's move on to running back.
Mhm.
This is the position that nobody really wants to draft early in a startup. It never feels good.
Right.
And I mean, that makes sense. Like it does have a short shelf life. We're seeing
Mhm.
even in the real NFL, like how fragile it can be with these threatened holdouts.
Right.
Um, so how do you approach this position? Because it's such a short shelf life position.
Right.
Yeah. How do you deal with that in a startup?
So for me and for the listeners who have hated to hear the word warp, I will not be talking about wins over replacement. I'm not giving a lot of statistical analysis. This is just kind of common sense analysis. So, like I've said, I think you should get two elite quarterbacks and an elite tight end before you address anything else. But a year ago, I probably would have written a different strategy guide. I would have valued running backs a little bit higher than I do now. But for instance, last year, Jonathan Taylor was the RB1, and he scored the same as Austin Eckler this year, who was also the RB1, the same points per game. And I remember last year thinking, oh, Jonathan Taylor's points per game, I think it was like below 22. So it was taking the top off fantasy, but not like that 25 point per game that we've seen out of McCaffrey and guys like Todd Gurley. So the league's changing a little bit where the wide receivers are scoring just about as much as the running backs. Like if you go with the top 12 wide receivers and the top 12 running backs, like 1-to-1, the wide receivers are scoring the same or more. And also, along with this, the most important thing, I'm going to try to keep this succinct because we're at like an hour and 15 here.
I got my eye on it. I got my eye on it.
Okay.
You're good. You're good to go.
So I'd say that you should be grabbing late round running backs. Like you can find them in the 7th round plus who will give you RB1 production or maybe RB1 production. These are guys like Joe Mixon, James Conner, who are cheap kind of for just because of age. And I said right at the beginning of the show that guys who you take in the 7th, 8th, 9th round plus, they're probably not lasting that long on your team anyway. You're just going to replace them with your 1st round pick, your 2nd round pick next year. So you should just be getting guys that are going to score the most points. That's my big take for anything after about round 8. We're really, really confident in thinking that we know the best. We can select the guys that are surely going to go up in value. But if you're going to be taking a guy that maybe won't go up in value and he maybe won't give you points, I'd rather just be all in on a guy who's 100% going to go up in value, like a rookie pick, or a guy who's 100% going to give you points, or 95% pending injury. And those are guys like Joe Mixon and James Conner, which are these late round running backs. If not,
Right.
if not those guys, I would say grab backup running backs who have really simple paths to usage, guys with a lot of contingent upside. Either James Conner, Joe Mixon, they have use value. The other guys, the backups, they have contingent value. Those are guys like Alexander Madison or Tony Pollard last year. Those two, they had a lot of contingent value, and now it's realized itself, and they went up in value. Try to find guys like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily work out where those guys become starters for their teams
Mhm.
and you can just reap all the rewards, but
Right.
you can get spot starts out of them. You can get stretches of production. Somebody like Elijah Mitchell, I think, is a good buy. I highlighted him on the show with Dynasty Zoltan as one of those better bench running backs that you can go pick up because like we know that he's good. We know he plays in a good offense. He plays behind a 27-year-old undersized running back who's had like 2 full season injuries in the past in Christian McCaffrey. So there's like as good a chance as any that he's going to be thrust into a starting role. There's no other competition on the depth chart. And when he does start, you can plug him in and know you're getting high end RB2 production.
Mhm.
So he's a great guy to pick. And the great thing is that by the time he's going off the board, there are like literally no wide receivers you want to draft.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So it's a great spot to get running backs, but are you like totally out on drafting running backs earlier than that? Like you said round 7, but like are there running backs you are willing to take earlier?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain ones. It's just usually my first 3 rounds are dominated by quarterback and tight end. So the first chance I would draft a running back would be round 4. So the
Yeah.
guys that I'd take there would be like maybe guys like Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, like Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard. I feel fine selecting those guys at ADP. I think all of them are probably gonna give me the points that I want to get.
Yeah.
But I usually would try to take maybe wide receivers there, and those would be guys who I think are going to go up in value, not guys like DK Metcalf. I'd rather have a guy like, maybe Drake London, who I could totally see jump into that top 12 wide receiver.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it depends on the build, of course. Like you have to draft with a reason. If you're drafting a rebuilding team, you're not going to go ahead and take Cooper Kupp in the 4th round. It doesn't make any sense. So if I'm drafting a rebuilding team, I probably wouldn't take a running back. Just doesn't make any sense. They're not going
Oh
to
yeah.
hold their
No,
value. They're going to
totally
give you
agree.
way too many points, so you don't get that 101. So it absolutely depends on the build of your team. but I'm not totally out at selecting a running back by round 4. The first 3 rounds, like I said, go get that top 12 quarterback, get that top 1, 2, 3 tight end, and that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're drafting a productive struggle or you're trying to tank year one, then
Mm.
please don't draft a running back early. That defeats the whole point. I mean, and maybe if it's somebody who drops like way past ADP and you're just drafting them to try to flip them later, maybe that works out. But
Mhm.
no, I mean, it's mainly like if you're trying to compete, because we're talking about how do we construct our rosters to win games.
Mhm.
And I just want to be clear, we're towing a fine line between allocating our roster value properly to win games versus like not losing all of our dynasty value, because
Mhm.
because that's the thing about dynasty that makes it so fun, is that you have these like two
Right.
kind of opposed ideas of
Mhm.
like keeping your team valuable but also scoring points, and a lot of times those things are opposite to each other.
Yeah.
And so with running backs, like that is more like that's the most stark discrepancy between like what can I get now and what can I get later. Like
Right.
we don't know what kind of value Pollard, Ramondre, Chubb, Jacobs are going to have a year from now. We just know that they can provide a lot of value right now.
Right.
And so I find them appealing at where they go, just because they kind of go generally after all of the really good wide receivers, and they typically go right before a group of wide receivers and quarterbacks that I have like no interest in.
Mhm.
So if I'm not trading down, like I'm usually going to end up with one of those guys.
Mhm.
And I kind of like them as like a hero RB kind of build, and then you can wait a long time, like you said, and then you can pick up all those contingent bets that
Yeah.
you're talking about, and just kind of hope to piece the position together that way.
Right.
That's a strategy that people take in best ball, and you can use that strategy and win $1 million in a best ball tournament. I think it can work in dynasty as well. And
Mhm.
the great thing is that you're also serving the purpose of like not over investing in a position that's very fleeting.
Yeah. I totally agree with all of that. I think we summed up the running back position very well.
Yeah, so that just leaves us with one to go, which is wide receiver. Um, and now that we've fleshed out all these other positions, it kind of just leaves wide receiver to fill in the gap. So like if I
Yeah.
just take everything that you've said, right? You're taking your first 3 picks, they're already locked in. Your late picks are going to be running backs. By process of elimination, that means those middle rounds, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those are your wide receiver rounds, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, wide receivers, for the most part, if you're not getting like one of the top 12 ones, or even one of the top 5 ones, it's similar to running back. And I guess it's similar to most positions, is that they're not giving you that big of a difference in production. Like from the top 12, I mean, I actually, could I ask you to pull it up while I talk? Is the difference between wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 24 is much, much different than wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 12. So for this, I'm just looking for the wide receivers that will go up in value, because chances are they're going to go up in value or hold their value compared to the older ones, the crusty ones. If they're going to lose their value and give me the same production, I don't know why I'd take them.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm looking. I'm not sure if you wanted me to pull up your chart
Mhm.
or something else, but yeah, looking at the Windsor replacement, I mean, it does get kind of flat. I mean,
Right,
all the positions have kind of a downward slope, obviously, because the further you go,
right.
the less valuable they're going to be. But you look at wide receiver, it's well below running back and
Mhm.
quarterback in terms of wins over replacement
Right.
at each equivalent point of positional ADP. It's really right down there with tight end.
Yeah.
Um, the real the I just totally lost my train of thought there. The real dynamic of wide receiver is the value component, that
Yes.
younger wide receivers are expected to play longer, and
Right.
they get pushed up in value because there's like they're balancing this year's production, which, oh, maybe it's less than the running backs, but there's also future years, and so that buoys them.
Mhm.
And then it creates like a shortage, and then that creates more demand for wide receivers.
Yeah. I
So they get chased up the board,
Mhm.
which means you kind of have to decide, like, are you in on this? Are you going to chase the wide receivers up the board too, or are you going to be content to just take the guys that are there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly good to just take the guys that are there. Like, it's kind of the same thing with running backs. By the time I'm done with my first 3 picks, all top 12 wide receivers are already off the board. So I'm just looking for guys that are going to hopefully get into that range or keep their value or just not lose their value is the most important thing, because all the guys from like round 4, besides like Devontae Adams, I think is a really big outlier. You've talked about him a lot, that he should absolutely have a way higher ADP.
Mhm.
But all the guys in rounds like 4 to about 7, they're really not giving you that many different points per game. They're all like within 2 to 3. So all of these guys, I'm just parsing between them, and I'm selecting the ones that are at value. So I'm just looking at ADP value, and I'm just combining that and making sure that I'm picking guys who won't lose value. So some guys that I listed in the guide are Drake London, JSN, Christian Watson, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison. Because seeing as someone like T. Higgins, who I know you've talked about his points per game, but just going season long points per game was 13.8, and he has no hope of being the main target on his team. And he's the dynasty wide receiver 10. Like, it's super possible that a lot of guys could jump into that top 12 and gain a lot of value. We see it year in, year out, where the guys jump into the top 12 and then they fall out of the top 12. It's just how it goes.
Yeah, and so you have to be kind of cognizant of that, like who has that potential, and then once they make that jump, you have to know,
Mhm.
is it time to abandon ship and kind of reset that and move on to the next guy, or is it, is it for real?
Right.
And that's maybe a topic for another show, but yeah, I agree with you there. You want to look for the guys that are either going to score you a lot of points now, or they have the best bet to accrue value, like you said.
Right.
Are there guys after that range? Because those are guys that are mostly going in that like fourth, fifth round range. After you get past there, are there certain players on the board that kind of jump out to you as maybe better wide receiver picks? Because I know I just did the wide receiver show with Chris. So like I obviously have my guys that I like, but I'm curious, are
Mhm.
there players that you find yourself gravitating towards in that maybe 6, 7, 8
Yeah. So
range?
I would say, and I've said it a couple times, that like after the seventh, eighth round, I don't put too much stock into guys mattering that much. But there are a few that I think actually could matter something. Those are guys like Deontay Johnson. I think is a really good bet to accrue value, but I think everyone's pretty wise to that. So good luck getting him in the 8th. But then you got Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, who we talked about. It could be giving you some points in like the 9th. Then after that, in the 10th, I know you like Rashad Bateman. I'm not a super big fan, but I get the logic. So down the board, there are these wide receivers that you
Can I
might be able to.
interest you in Elijah Moore?
Elijah Moore, I'm pretty firmly out on after listening to the show 2 weeks ago with Chris. He made a lot of really good points that I think Elijah Moore, he had like 4 or 5 good weeks his rookie year. Then since then, he hasn't really done anything. He had a pretty terrible sophomore season. I don't totally know why he's still going in the 10th as wide receiver 43.
Oh, I'm kind of
That's
getting
right
back
next.
in.
Yeah, maybe. It's right next to Mike Williams, who I'm also not big on, but at least Mike Williams has done something in his career. And he's right next to
Yeah.
he's going before Mike Evans, who I know you're out on, but I think I'd rather have Mike Evans than
Oh, get
Elijah
out of
Moore.
here. Get out of here. That's
Really?
ridiculous.
Wow.
Mike
Okay.
Evans,
Yeah.
why would I want
Hmm.
a 30-year-old wide receiver who's like guaranteed to finish as the wide receiver like 27 this year at best and
Right.
then get worse from there. Like at least Elijah Moore has some path to accrue value. Like Mike Evans is only going down from here and he's not even going to give me anything like on the way down. He's just
Yeah.
there's no reason to want Mike Evans. I think the case for Elijah Moore is that he had a really, really good college profile. He was
Hmm.
really good in college for multiple years, came into the NFL, was really good as a rookie. Like, I understand that it only manifested in a small subset of games,
Right.
but like that's just because he dealt with injuries and
Hmm.
like all the peripheral stuff was it's the same reason you were into Traylon Burks
Right.
this offseason. Like same
Hmm.
exact thing except better. Like his peripherals were better.
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, he had a down year last year, but like that season seems more like the outlier than the other seasons. So I'm kind of I don't know. He's not flawless by any means, but I think in the 10th round, I think he's one of the better options that could I think it would be very easy for Elijah Moore to be a 6th round startup pick in October. I think that would be very, very easy.
I would be very surprised, but all of this doesn't even matter because in the 10th round, I'm somehow taking Mac Jones at QB 28, like without a doubt, over both those guys. I think Mac Jones has gotten so suppressed in his value that he's become sort of a buy.
He's
Either
so
way,
boring though.
he's absolutely boring, but he's definitely good in real life. And the Bailey Zappi narrative was just so dumb. And he just never really recovered his value. I know that his rookie year, I think he was like QB 31 in points per game. I'm guessing this
Yeah.
past year was worse. But I mean, he's definitely a good real life quarterback. They seem committed to him at least at this point. I haven't heard Bailey Zappi rumors recently,
Yeah.
where I'm just going to be in at QB 28 prices because I don't know if I could name 28 better quarterbacks than Mac Jones.
I mean, it's fine. I think you're playing a little loose with definitely good. I think he's maybe possibly good, and he probably won't get benched this year. But yeah, I mean, at that price, it's fine. Like if you still need a quarterback at that point,
Are
by
you
all
taking
means.
Sam Howell over Mac Jones? Because ADP is.
I mean, I want to, but I probably shouldn't, and I probably wouldn't.
You probably should not.
I'd rather have Brock Purdy.
You can make a case for that, sure.
I'd rather have Matthew Stafford,
I'd
who
also
goes
rather have Matthew
in the
Stafford.
same
I'd
round.
rather have
So
Matthew Stafford and Mac Jones over Mike Evans and Elijah Moore.
okay,
The only thing is that Matthew Stafford goes after the two wide receivers there. Either way, the whole point is that these wide receivers, while they exist in the late rounds, chances are they're getting snatched up like maybe rounds early before ADP, which is why I'm so inclined to just take these running backs late. These guys like David Montgomery goes right 2 picks before Elijah Moore. Chances are Elijah Moore might just be gone. There's a really good chance David Montgomery's still going to be there. And he has just a ton of contingent upside. And he has just a lot of upside that's not even contingent. He's probably a good NFL running back who could see just a lot of work.
yeah, we both agree there. It's more of a running back zone for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree structurally where once I get into those teen rounds, like it's all about the running backs. Forget like just toggle off of wide receiver on
Yeah,
your app and just get the running backs. There's maybe some tight end value falls or whatever. But you really want to try to get your wide receivers sorted earlier
right.
because it does get gross quick.
It
And there are lots more running backs that you can kind of sell yourself on. And you don't want to be loading up your bench with the likes of like Darnell Mooney,
right.
Alec Pierce, Tank Dell, Cedric Tillman. Like those are your roster cloggers. You want to fill up your bench with those contingent
Yeah,
running backs. And so that lends itself to more of like a robust wide receiver strategy early where you get maybe 4 or 5 good wide receivers
mm-hmm.
and maybe one or no elite running backs because you have all these other running backs on your bench. So it just kind of works out that way.
Right.
I think that's a good way to build a team. And you can do that in your actual managed leagues as well. Like try to get those contingent running backs thrown into trades. Like I talked about that with Zoltan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, try to swap them for third round picks, fourth round picks, and just build up a bench because the more that you have, you get more swings
Right.
in any given week that one of those guys is going to become a starter and give you 13, 14 points, which is
Right.
exactly what we were saying. Like the good wide receivers are going to give you on a given week. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you can
And
really create a lot of production like that.
yeah, and these are the running backs that, like we said, you're getting so late. And the big logic is that when a wide receiver gets hurt versus when a running back gets hurt, the backup wide receiver has to go on the field. He has to get open, then earn a target, then catch the pass. Versus
Yeah.
running back production is mostly coach dependent. So if a running back goes down, all the running back has to do is run the ball and get the opportunity to run the ball. Like that's it. It's so much easier for a running back to get a fantasy point or many fantasy points than a backup running back get a lot of fantasy points than a backup wide receiver get a lot of fantasy points. We see it way more often on spike weeks, like you were saying.
Absolutely. That's why we don't have handcuff wide receivers. There's
Mhm.
no such thing. Like
Yes,
the wide
exactly.
receivers that are behind the good ones
Yeah.
are the bad ones. Like, and
Yes.
it doesn't matter if they get on the field, they're just not going to produce 90% of the original, like the backup running backs are going to do. Like we saw
Right.
CJ Anderson come in for the Rams and just catch lightning in a bottle and,
Mhm.
dominate down the stretch through a playoff run. He was never good. Like he
No,
literally was never good.
I
It's just,
totally agree.
yeah, it just happens. We see it all the time.
Yep.
It's kind of what hurts the whole running back holdout argument. Like, I
Mhm.
understand wanting to get paid. Like, obviously that makes
Right.
sense. But when you look at all the running backs that have had, like, all the teams that win the Super Bowl, they all have like UDFA running back, round 7
Mhm.
running back. Look at Isaiah Pacheco, right? It's just, it's very easy to replicate the production because so much of it is scheme dependent, offensive line dependent. And so that's really the whole thesis of just
Yeah.
getting the running backs that might find themselves in a position to succeed where
Right.
the talent doesn't matter as much as their spot on the depth chart.
Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate seeing everything that's happening. We're recording this on Tuesday, just seeing everything that's going on with the franchise tag running backs not getting their money. Of course I want the players to get their money, but seeing the leverage of pretty much every Super Bowl winning roster has just had a pretty not paid well running back or highly drafted running back doesn't really help their case. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that just all these running backs that you can get late are just so much more valuable than all the wide receivers you can get late, which is what I wrote in the Dynasty strategy article.
Yeah, man. Love it. Absolutely love it. It was a great piece. I think we did it justice here today. We got through these 4 positions. It's a lot to get through. And in a way, it's kind of a summary of the last several shows that I did where we really went in depth on each of these positions. This kind of encapsulates a lot of the theory that I talked about on those shows. So I think it's a good way to kind of put a bow on that.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you putting your thoughts into it. We're really wrapping things up here. So do you have any final thoughts before I close things out? Maybe anything you're working on or whatever you want to leave the people with?
Yeah, I mean, you can always check out my stuff on Dynasty Football Factory. Right now, in between working on the strategy article, I'm doing a comparing ADP 8-part series where I'm looking at every division and I compare the redraft ADP and the Dynasty ADP to see where you can find those market discrepancies. Sometimes it's really obvious. Yeah, if a guy's super old, he's not going to be drafted highly in Dynasty. But sometimes there's weird guys where you find those market inefficiencies, and that's everything I'm looking at. So I super highly advise reading it. I've had a ton of fun writing it, as well as this strategy article. I've loved writing it for you guys.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. Malcolm's written content is high quality. Follow him on Twitter at 716DFF. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. Obviously, follow the show on Spotify or subscribe to the YouTube. Leave a 5-star review somewhere. I think you can do that on Spotify. You can definitely do it on Apple Podcasts. All that stuff helps a lot. Gives me the chance to keep doing what we're doing, keep making shows, having a lot of fun doing it. So thank you guys for listening. I will catch you all next week on the factory tour.